Okay, hi, welcome to another ignitron car on the dyno. This one I'm just going to go through some basic settings on a fresh install. The car in question is a TT225. It's running a KF4 380, 610cc injectors, mathless, etc. Does have auto meth, although that's unplugged until the base tune's done. One of the things I'm reading frequently on the Ignitron Facebook page is people struggling to get their VE dialed in and going on and round in circles. It seems with respect to injector sizing, dead times, VE table, etc., etc. People reporting that they've got minus 25% short-term trims and then seemingly unable to know what to do with that. So what I hope to show whilst doing this TT is a process that will enable you to just dial in extremely quickly what's right from what's wrong. Okay, so what we got in front of us is the engine's running at the minute, just on the default settings for the injection. So overview, setup. We can see the injectors are sat at 610 cc's because the ones that we use. Dead time is just the default of the wizard setting. I'll leave that there for the minute. And we get to what the lambda's doing or not doing. So at the minute the thing's still warming up. So things I do that work for me, so you can listen and adapt or make your own way nonetheless. I like seeing some real-time screens via the gauges. So I'm looking for now with my really bad eyesight, it's looking for injector, short-term fuel trim, there we are. So I've got this on screen no matter what's going on. So I can flick between ignitron screens and it's still there. So we've got short-term trim around about minus 4%, same as on the lambda learned values currently. Things that are relevant to that, it'll be things like engine RPM. So another gauge, engine RPM, so you can see exactly where we're going to sit in any of the respective tables we're going to look at. So I just create these gauges always when I'm going to do a tune, so you can see what's going on. So another important thing, sensors would be map sensor. That is the end of the day, one of the axes, RPM and pressure. This we'll be able to determine where we are. Another one to look at, just because you're not quite sure, it's not a car we built, but it's sensors, engine coolant temp. So if weird stuff's not happening, like isn't happening at the minute, for example, no adaptions inactive, so you see, the reason for that is because it's not got past 70 degrees yet. It's sat at 53. So when people are saying, oh, I've done this work and I've run around the block and I've had a check and it's done no adaptions, just check your coolant temperature settings. If it's not warmed up, it won't adapt. Now you can play with these settings. I generally put them to 60, but so remember, if you make a change, write it, else it's not changed. So we've got 5 degrees to go at the minute before adaptions will kick in. The lambda's busy learning some idle stuff at the minute, or it will do, but so it will adapt about 5% out based on what's going on. So things still warming up, so some warm enrichment things that will be starting to fade out as the car is obviously warming up. Now we're not driving on a dyno, it's just sat literally ticking over with just the exhaust extract fans running. Real-time mapping. Now people probably haven't used this. I use it occasionally, but I'm going to use it now just so I can show people if you're going to struggle with adaptions that are miles out, you can balance between dead times and the main VE table. Dead times will have the most effect on anything around idle because the dead time is a major proportion of the injector on time. So injectors are barely on when you're around idle and like cruise and stuff. So if you've got big ass injectors, ID 1050s as an example, Yep, they'll be 1050, but they're pretty non-linear above or below 2 milliseconds, which is typically very light load cruising. So it's not unusual to see VE tables that have a really big bump in the sort of bottom corner where the injectors are barely on. Now, dead time has the most influence at that point, so it's always the first port of call to have a look at, but it's not the be-all and end-all. You cannot correct a non-linear injector by its dead time, which is where I believe some people are possibly going wrong. So we're at 60 degrees, just. Idle's now in standby, so it's thinking about doing something. We're on 36 kPa, so we're in the LTFT add level. Now what we'll see, if we look at target lambda, we should be around about 1 for anything cruise lambda of 1. So certainly on idle position where we are now, lambda 1 is the target. Go back to adaptions. See the snail trace. So the real-time mapping VE map is below. So you can see where we're at, the little clump of yellow cells. Oh, there we go. Learned values kicking in. And hey presto, the additive offset is gone -5, nearly -6. And short to trim's bound down to point something. Now you can chase your tail going around in circles, trying to get this to 0.00. That's not reality. If you get within 5%, it will drift on its own for atmospheric conditions, temperature conditions, etc. So at the minute, on idle, it thinks -6%, 6.5% now is where it wants to be. Now, as an example, we're -6.4%. We could try adjusting the dead time down by that -6.4%. So you can go into the dead times, do an expression, -6, I'm going to multiply it by 0.94 to reduce that number. So we'll take a look at lambda adaptation. Just going to write that change. So now made a change to dead times of around about 6%. And now we see the additive changing. So I changed it by 6. And we've taken a percent or so out of it a minute. So it's -5.6. So I didn't do all of it. So we still have an offset. So what I will be doing at this point, saying, okay, with these cells that are sat around idle, and we're at -5.4 on additive, let's just take 5 off them. So we'll make those 95. I'm going to apply that. And because I haven't reset the value, it's now unlearning the 5, the -5. So we're like a bit of -2 there and a bit of +2 there. We'll end up net 0-ish because I've took 5% out of the VE down here. So you can see these values reducing. Short circuit this so I don't have to just reset. So learned values, reset learned, and oh look, we're pretty much near 0 around idle at this moment. So dead times did a percent of the 6 that were wrong, but the VE made the major adjustment. Okay, so got -5 round about where idle was, so VE of 995 in that area, and additive trims at half. I'll live with that. I'm going to apply that table V is changed. Would you like to write it to map? Yes. Write it anyway. Go back into the actual VE table, look, and our live values are now in there. And we got a handy little gauge over here telling us where we are. So what I'll do is, we're on the dyno at the minute. I'll turn some front fans on. Just put some load on the dynos, just drive a bit. We're just going through up the gears at the minute. This is the first time the car's been on the dyno. Just had some work done to it. It literally is a base file off the wizard for a BAM engine. Well, you can see by driving, just generally cruising up the throttle at the minute, you can see the trims that will be being learned slowly. But if you see gross errors, you can see it whilst you're in this view. So there's big holes in the VE map, plus or minus. Whilst you drive through them, just look at your short-term fuel trim, the adjustment that it's making, and the cell that you're in. So if you want to make some quick changes, if it's miles out, make those quick changes. Don't wait for it to learn. And you can do learning, obviously. But where there's gross errors, particularly those people who have been chasing minus 25% problems, where you're that far out, make some big adjustments. Don't wait for lambda to do it for you. It's clearly grossly wrong. So we're just up fifth gear at the minute, crawling along. Let's change the steps on the dyno. Okay, so I'm sat on some cells. We're in the VE at the minute. I'm going to go back into the lambda adaptation on the multi. So here are some cells that have been adjusted big time already. So we're set at about 1400 RPM, 89 kPa. So we're in these cells. So it's been pulling out 10% at this point. If I roll off the throttle, you can see the cells being coloring in. Now you can do this on your own if you're just cruising around, driving the car normally. Now the boost control on this has been set to be actuator only pressure, so there's no danger of overboosting because we've turned everything down. Limp modes have been set such that if anything weird was to happen, it will drop us to limp mode, which we kind of want. This is early days, this is literally a bass tune. So I'm driving the thing slowly, up and down, coloring in. So you can do this on the road, just driving normally, and this will populate. So there's some overall negative values going on, being learned. Let the dyno go a bit faster. So around 70, 50, 1800 RPM. Just roll on and off the throttle as it sees some load. More speed on the dyno. So what you can see is essentially the lambda adaptions are being coloured in as it's making some trims. And we need to have sufficient white cells in here, which is I learn data, so you get a feel for what is the fueling doing. And overall, on this top multi, the average of all the white cells is minus 8.8%. So the VE ultimately will be brought down by that, but as an average, so these ups and downs, peaks and troughs. All I'm actually doing here is just rolling on the throttle, rolling off the throttle, rolling on, rolling off. So just go down the gearbox a bit, as if you would be if you just accelerate slowly. Basically letting the car slow down on its own merit at the minute, just working against the inertia on the rollers, so it's just cruising down the highway, not very fast in fifth gear, barely touching the throttle. All we are doing is just seeing the very light load settings come up now. As you see the cells change colour from black to violet. Okay, just grab neutral. So we got beginnings of a shape to know what short-term trims are doing, long-term trims are doing. Interestingly, now it's all warmed up. We're now adding fuel back in. This is different atmospheric conditions. It's warmed up a bit now. You can go around in circles trying to make it zero. You just never will. We'll leave that to do its learning thing. So the adaptation, it's going to make the first level of changes. So let's turn the engine off for now. Whilst the ignitron is connected to the laptop, the ECU will remain on. So going to lambda value, you see this learn numbers here. If you right click, look at it in 2D, just start from the bottom row, work your way up. You can see that it's had some values, and clearly where there's some values not been learned, shortcut it, just smooth it. You can see what should and shouldn't be looking like a shape. And this will be the first go at adjusting a VE based on that very minimal data, but it gets you in the ballpark. Okay. So you can sort of see the shapes. Apply some smoothing. This will start to form the shape of the VE. Where you see big excursions, be wary of applying all of them. Take most of them, see what happens. Then after assorted iterations of doing this, then you'll get a feel for what the shape should be as best you can. So this isn't going to be totally accurate, but it gets you a lot closer. So what you end up doing, particularly around the low end, is if you've got big injectors, again I use ID 1050X's as a great example, they're extremely non-linear on the bottom end, and you'll never fix that with dead times. You can only fix that with VE. So don't be surprised you can have some weird looking VEs at the low end, and the bottom rows of like low KPA, so high vacuum, and low RPMs where the injectors are literally barely on, but the dead time is a huge proportion of that, and the injectors just don't spray well, and they're not linear down there. Just how it is, big injectors and low on times is non-linear. So you can see a pattern going on here, the odd missed cell, so you just fill in the cell. Get it closer. Obviously you can see the grey lines in the background, well that's just showing you other rows, so you can kind of blend. But this gets you a lot closer in the VE. So when you start doing some more, the VE gets closer, closer, better, obviously more accurate, such that your fuel trims will be small trims and more accurate. If it doesn't have to make big adjustments, it'll make a better job of it. Single cell, it's not much use, but you can see from the grey lines below, there's a shape. Now these are areas that are likely we'll never get to, and if we do, they'll be transient. And obviously we'll follow the pattern as far as we've gone. And that's the last row of data. Okay, so they kind of look alright. Quickly scroll back down, see if there's any weird anomalies, which there aren't. So I'm going to apply that. Not sure, yep. So it's applied to the VE, so the VE has now got some of these learned values. This clump here, that's what we've learnt. Don't forget to write it into the ECU. Good practice. Save it as a different version of your file. You can keep tracks. If you do make a balls up of it, you can always go back one. So I just do numeric and increment every time. So we'll start the engine up again. Turn some fans on so I don't die. Now we've still got learned adaptions from doing it before. What I'm going to do now, clear them. If you've made some changes to your VE, clear and reset the learned values, else you just have to unlearn them. It just takes ages. There's no good reason to have to unlearn an offset. If you press reset, it'll go again. Interestingly, an offset of 5%. Oh, the irony. We took 5% out round here, now it wants 5% back. So I'm in the main VE table. I'm going to go up 2.5 of that, just because I'm going to go half the error. This one just going to do an expression. It'll let me. Thank you. That's 2.5. So I took 5 out and I just put 2.5 back. Again, don't forget to write it. I'm just going to save that file because I don't care about that particular change. Go back to adaptions. And we're now back at 2-ish and falling. So I made half the adjustment. We're down like 1%. Let that carry on. This is the additive, so this is the idle one here. So the values it's loading at these throttle positions. That's what these numbers mean. So go back into multi. Still dyno, no brake. Okay, just accelerate up. So hopefully what you can see already is the numbers it's loading again now. Now we've applied some changes to the VE, are much smaller numbers. So we're on the right path in terms of getting the VE dialed in. Now some iterations. So I'm doing this on a dyno because I can, and it's a good place to do it. But you can do this on the road, so you can just be cruising around. Don't rush it, and don't try and make decisions based on like what's on screen now. Very little data, that's not going to get you a good VE table. You need to get these populated far better. Baby steps. Don't try and run before you can walk. Let the ECU guide you as to what's the correct fueling to apply to the VE. I'm just going to let it drop to low RPM. We're in 5th gear, so should load some 1500 RPM cells. 1250, 15, yeah. So we can see on the multi, obviously there's not that many white cells for it to report an average, but it's pretty close, isn't it? 0.9%. We were 8% or more before. So going down the right route. But where you see gross errors, use the injector trim to see where it's wrong. You can look at your actual VE table whilst you're running it. Obviously it's easy for me to say because I'm on a dyno strapped, so I don't have to steer it or watch for other traffic because I haven't got any in my dyno cell. But you can see exactly where you are. If you wanted to make live changes, there is this button up here called real-time mapping. So to get you dialed in really quickly, where you've got gross errors, so there's a few of you reporting like minus 25%, I can't set my injector scaling. Use the VE, use the short-term trims, and you can either make adjustment in the area that you're sat in, highlighting some areas there. If there's a gross error, there isn't at the minute, but if there was, then you can adjust it. Likewise, if you go into real-time mapping, you can type a number directly in there and it will make a difference. And afterwards you get to apply it to the VE. So you have a choice. But this will dial you into your injector scaling. Now, generally, what I find, if I've been told I've got some injectors and they're of a size and we haven't tested them, you go in the setup, these are 610s, we know they're 610s because we test them. So these are going to be somewhere handy. Sometimes you get told an injector, or we make an assumption on fuel pressure, for example, and it isn't what you thought it was, be it higher or lower, and you're getting an overall VE that looks massively biased. So it's, instead of being based around 100, give or take plus or minus, you end up 130, and everything's like 20% higher than it should be, or 30% lower than it should be. That just screams that your injector sizing is wrong. My rough and ready sanity check is if I'm cruising in this sort of area, so with a bit of boost, enough RPM so the engine's working a bit, and if all these numbers were particularly biased, like 20, 30% off 100, then that would just shout to me that my injector scaling is wrong, and I would change the injector size such that I corrected that. So when you're making adjustments, then your VE table will go below 100 to above 100, but not be all biased one way or the other by a lot. Now in this example, the injector sizing is kind of okay. So we can see we've got small on times in these areas. We've took fuel out of the VE, but as we start to operate under more load, we're getting closer to 100 VE. So ultimately, the injector sizing is not too bad. We haven't got this massive offset. So I'll conclude this bit now, else I'll be waffling for ages, but for those that are struggling with getting your injector sizing done, hopefully this is useful. You can say add the gauges, short-term fuel trim, RPM, map sensor, KPA, and then physically see where you are and where it needs adjustment, and make that adjustment. Like physically make it. Dial it in quickly. Don't wait, unlearn lambda. If it's minus 25% wrong, you have a gross error. So injector scaling, end of VE, or you've got a terrible dead time setting. Okay, good luck, guys. Cheers.